Guten Tag, Observer, und willkommen in Zoom mein Welt. In this episode, we are talking about, what are we talking about? Public hearings. I don't know exactly how to describe what just happened. But anyway, if you've not been following my channel for long, or if you just not have know, if you just do not know, I have multiple channels here on YouTube. I have one that's dedicated to gaming, one that's dedicated to my science ventures, as I am a budding geochemist, and I also have um, this vlogging channel. Okay, so um, this video in particular is a vlog about my science ventures and a public hearing that I attended recently in regards to fracking wastewater and injection wells. In the town that I'm from, well, that I spent most of my life in. I've worked there. I lived there for several years. Uh, there was an incident where there was a fracking injection well site on the outskirts of town, and this injection well it was injecting fracking wastewater into the ground, and unfortunately there was sediment pits beside the injection well, which they used to hold on to extra waste and such like that before sending it down the injection well. And unfortunately, the liners in these pits leaked and contaminated the nearby creek, which was the headwaters for a stream that runs through two towns and for a while was the primary source of drinking water in that area. Now, once it was discovered that there was a leak, the owner realigned the pits. He didn't do the original pit liner wasn't set up properly, and the second one wasn't set up properly either. Uh, However, regardless of this, the second liner ended up leaking into the environment and releasing contamination. And a couple of years later, Dr. Vengosh from Duke University came up, tested the water to confirm that the contamination was actually fracking wastewater instead of what everybody else thought was acid mine drainage water, which was also affecting the Wolf Creek at that time. Obviously, this is a heavily polluted creek. Before this event, which started happening in about middle 2000s, there was acid mine drainage that was plaguing the creek since, I believe, around the 70s. And in addition to that, there's so many leaking septic systems in that creek that it's essentially a poop creek and it's undrinkable. The creek is not healthy. It's like the Hudson of West Virginia, in a sense. Um, but regardless of this, um, after Dr. Vingosh's reports, the sediment pits were dug up under the direction of the West Virginia DEP, and the permit for the injection well site, which has to have a permit in order to inject, they were issued um, a continuance. They were allowed to continue injecting um, fracking wastewater into the injection well due to contractual things that are so that none of his contracts and such like that would be void or anything like that. Um, However, his permit was um, denied, um, where they were going to have a public hearing to see if it could be reissued. But while that permit was pending, they decided to let him continue injecting fracking wastewater into the ground. Okay, now where this came in, I decided to start doing research. This was my hometown. If my hometown was obviously contaminated at some point in time, according to Dr. Vengosh's data, And so I set out to see if the remediation of digging up those sediment pits did the job. So I went out and tested to see if there was still a leak. And I spent several hours of this. This was the middle of the winter. I was wading through ice cold water in waters that were presumably radioactive until I could prove otherwise. And of course, you have organics that cancer causing organics and such like that, which, of course, with my line of work, in order to do my line of work, you have to have an understanding that you're probably going to get cancer. You're probably going to die. So I faced the fear of cancer a long time ago. So to me, I felt that it was just a necessity to jump into the creek and see if how contaminated it was, if it was contaminated, and so on. Because if there was a leak, then at least I can see how bad of a leak it was. Okay, so now that all that back information is has been demonstrated, revealed, let me go on to the public hearing that happened just recently that I attended. At this public hearing, unfortunately, um, well, unfortunately, people who were brought there to speak had something to say at this public hearing. There are only authorized 2 minutes of talking time. Okay, I had collected my data, I had figured it up into a presentation, and my presentation was going to be about 8-10 minutes. And that was generally what the scientists that were there had planned for, a 5 to 10 minute presentation. And in addition to that, there was no, like, we weren't allowed to have PowerPoint presentations or pictures or anything like that. It was just a talk. So luckily I did have a manuscript to go on instead of like bringing a presentation. So I had a manuscript. However, I was shocked to discover I only have 2 minutes to talk. And unfortunately, the problem with a 2-minute talk is that you only really have time to put one side of the data forward. Well, a one-sided argument forward. And this proved to be rather annoying because I'm in favor of the injection well continuing to inject into the ground. However, I do not want that guy making any more pits. Somebody else has to build the pits for him. There has to be a certified engineer because obviously he did it wrong, and I'll explain how he did it wrong here in a minute. Maybe I'll actually do that on my science video, but right now I just want to talk about public hearings and the media. So anyway, I had 2 minutes to talk. Everybody had supposedly 2 minutes to talk. Okay, so the beginning of the talk, this politician named Tom, I didn't catch his last name. He's a Mountain State political leader. He started the talk, and he was disgruntled with 2 minutes. Everybody was really disgruntled with 2 minutes. And he kind of opened it up, said that what was going on was illegal and such like that. And that's pretty understandable. And then shortly after that, I go up and give my speech. And like I said, I was only allowed to have 2 minutes. I couldn't say everything I wanted to say. I did present my data, which my data suggested that the injection well itself was not leaking, and that the remediation of the pits had proved to be effective and such like that, and that there were no visible organics left there anymore. Okay, and that's pretty much all I got to say. I did say that my opinion on fracking is that I don't agree with fracking right now because I feel that it should be a last-ditch effort, and that the only fracking that should be going on is for research basis only, for the event that we have to do fracking. So I disagree with fracking, but the situation is that fracking has happened. And as what was brought up at the meeting and Vengosh's report, is that this stuff cannot be on the surface, and that it should be put underground. And so I supported the injection well. However, there should have been more time to consider, well, what are the layers there, how much can it support, such like that, which another geologist came and brought up that opinion. Um, it's a very valid opinion, and there were valid concerns. I mean, the way it was handled was questionable. Um, like, everybody brought up good points. However, where it started turning um, southward was when people started taking advantage of the 2-minute time slots. Like I said, I only had 2 minutes. However, the guy who came before me, he got donated more time by somebody else. And so he got back up on stage for 4 minutes and started disparaging my data, except he didn't disparage my data. Um, his argument is that the reason why I didn't turn up any contamination in my chemical analysis was because whenever the injection well turns off its pumps, that there's no sign of contamination, because whenever the pumps are on, it puts pressure into the ground, and that's when, due to pressure, it bubbles up and contaminates the creek. However, I can attest, my ears can attest, that the machine was well up and running whenever I was taking my samples, because I did it about 200 feet away from the injection well itself. I was able to get up to 200 feet from the injection well. And I could hear it going. I could see the site with my own eyes. It was actually going. So, I mean, he tried to discredit my data, but the irksome thing about it was that I couldn't refute what he said because my 2 minutes were up, yet he was being donated more and more time. And so, obviously, this wasn't a scientific forum. I presented my data, and then somebody refuted my data, and then I couldn't refute that rebuttal. And that seemed to be, that kind of was bothersome to me, but I didn't shout out that, well, you're using an irrational argument, because he would have to prove that the pump was off when I was taking my samples, which I can attest was not the case. And I mean, it was just, I didn't have pawns in the audience like he did to give him time, to give me time to answer that. And the guy also threatened to shut me down and such, but that's not that important. What was important was how that was handled. These public hearings, from my experience, it seems like it's really not that beneficial. I was the only one there who presented an opposing viewpoint, and that was kind of unsettling, because my data did match like the DEP's data from what I'd seen, even though my data and their data was a year away. We did it in the same season, same month even, and we had this similar results. And it was baffling to see that I was the only one presenting an opposition to the closure of the wells. And people in the audience, there was people in the audience who agreed with me. They're typically the younger people. They appreciated that I actually brought data to the table, that I provided evidence, and that I could back it up if I was asked. And they didn't like the fact that I couldn't do a rebuttal. And then immediately after that, I stayed to listen to another scientist talk, and he recognized me as doing the work as well, but he kind of said that his work matched Dr. Vengosh's, which would suggest that it was still leaking, which was contrary to my data. And it's difficult to say who's right or wrong. I fully stand behind my data. The problem was he didn't actually show his data. He just said he had data, and I believe if he had more time to his presentation, because he was at the same problem I was. He was allowed to do a 6-minute speech, whereas I was only able to do 2. And even in that 6-minute speech, his main discussion was how laws were broken, how it wasn't handled properly, and he didn't get to actually show data if he brought data. So The only thing that would have swayed me is data. If somebody has better data than me, I would totally um, accept theirs. I mean, it wouldn't match my data, but I would have to see why it didn't match my data. Was there something wrong? Was there something wrong with his data? Is there something wrong with my data? They actually brought forth data. Um, if somebody brought forth data that contradict mine and proved to be better data than mine, then I would go with it. I mean, I'm a reasonable human being. I'm not going to just like deny data. But anyway, after that, I was given an opportunity to have a news interview. And in this news interview, it took about 15, 20 minutes. He interviewed me for 15 or 20 minutes. And like that kind of made me nervous because, of course, I'm still a student. I just had a guy like threaten me. Like I wasn't nervous whenever I was giving the interview. And I wasn't nervous whenever I was on the stand, but after I gave the interview and I realized he only had 3 hours to edit um, everything before the news came on, um, I started getting nervous. It was like, what if I accidentally misstep something? Because I didn't know it was going to be on the news. I didn't know that they were going to ask me because I didn't know that I was the only one there with an opposite opinion. And so I was put on the news, and I was afraid. I was like, "Oh man, I hope my school doesn't view this as like me representing their ideas and stuff like that." And I was kind of nervous. I mean, I had it in my head that probably nothing was going to happen, but I upset a politician, like a politician leader, and he threatened to shut me down. I mean, I don't know if that was a threat in regards to his rebuttal or a threat in regards to him trying to kick me out of school. And just me being affiliated with that school in the news article could have maybe sparked something. I don't. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized that my professor reassured me that we have that students have um, academic freedom in regards to research. That even if it's controversial, but I can't get kicked out over it. Um, so, in regards to that, I was in a panic. I had like a 15-minute interview that I wasn't prepared for at all, and I didn't get to watch the news report. Well, I did, but I didn't see myself on TV, and I was like, okay, well they said that I was going to be on TV. Why didn't I see it? And it turns out that I was on TV for a total of like 20 seconds. Somehow they edited my 15 to 20 minute interview down to at most 20 seconds. And it sounded like the only thing that they showed from what I heard was that they had me say, well, they had a recording of me saying that um, the fracking wastewater has been pulled out of the ground and it needs to go back into the ground. And that's all they took that's all they took from my 15-minute interview. So my problem with this was not only was I not able to present like more than a one-sided argument with my 2-minute limitation, but even when I was given the opportunity to give a 15-minute presentation, I was only given really 20 seconds to explain my point, which of course they got to select what 20 seconds that was. So from this experience, I have learned that really um, public hearings are horrible. I mean, even if you have data, even if you have scientific evidence to back up what you're saying, you're not given any real credence. And it's just really politicians are in control because they have the sway to have people in the audience to give them more time. So the politicians have more say in public hearings and stuff like that, which of course it's politics and stuff like that. But I was I was taken back by just how gross it was. I mean, here I had scientific evidence that I had collected and presented, and it was being trumped by nothing. Like, there was no real rebuttal. It's just somebody saying, "Oh, this is bad." Like, the guy, he didn't present any real evidence at all. He was just like, "Well, we need to do this, we need to do that. West Virginia is a sacrificial state," and such like that. And it was like astonishing to see just how little anyone really cared about actual scientific data on in that instance, and that it was really just popular opinion and such like that. And I wasn't the only scientist there. Like, there was another scientist there, like I said, who brought up, like, well, I would require DEP to tell us about the rock layers. Like, is there a confining aquifer? Is there confining layers? Is there open layers? Is the layer that it's being injected to, is it able to hold the amount? And because he was only given 2 minutes, towards the end of his speech, he came off sounding like, what it sounded like was that it wouldn't have mattered even if he had that data, that he would still oppose it no matter what the data was. And I can't really say that that's really what he was saying, because I experienced it. We only had 2 minutes to talk, and that's not enough time to actually present data, but yet the politicians got to have more time. And even then, like, even when I had the opportunity to explain further, I was only given 20 seconds. And it's just it's just astonishing to see how little science is involved in these issues. How little of importance science is to these environmental issues. It was baffling my mind. It still baffles my mind. And that's why I had to make a video of this. I understand that it's way over 20 minutes now, but I want to get the point home that obviously, I mean, the younger people in the audience, they seemed to be more accepting of, like, they were more accepting of, like, that I had data. Like, they seemed to be a more rational mind, which of course people are like, oh, the younger generation is dumb and stuff like that. But they actually were like, well, he actually had a point and he had something to back it up. And they were like, he should have had an opportunity to refute himself, which of course I guess I could have yelled across the thing, like, you're wrong, that's a logical argument, but I chose to be civil, and that's how it should be done. People should be able to be civil in an instance like this. However, it greatly disturbed me to see how little credence was given to science in this instance, where public opinion was way more appreciated than what science had to say, that what data had to say. And of course, data can be wrong. Like, if somebody has better data, he wins the scientific argument. I mean, even if there is, like, conflicting data, if they can reinforce their data better, then perhaps they're right and I'm wrong. And I accept that. That's how science works. But in this case, it didn't matter what the science said. It's what the politicians said, and whoever had the most time to accurately present their point. Because, like I said, the scientists that were there, they didn't really get to establish a real point. Only the politicians did. And I think that was a gross injustice that happened. And I'm sure that the DEP will probably handle this in the best interest for all parties. Maybe, maybe not. That's up to public opinion whether they handle it correctly or not. However, it was an amazing event. It was an amazing experience. I had my blood beating. I mean, my data was being invalidated incorrectly. Like, my data could have been invalidated. I could point out how it could be invalidated. However, I could not defend my data, and I couldn't demonstrate how his argument did not defeat my data. And that's what made my blood pumping. It wasn't that he was invalidating my data. It was that I wasn't allowed to defend my data. And so, anyway, that's pretty much. I've rambled on for quite some time, but the bottom line is that um, science, man, science. Does science have that little sway in everything? Like, how much gets blown to the side by politicians who have more time on their hands, more resources? How much gets blown to the side of the politicians instead of the actual science? And how many like scientists who see this do that as well? Like, it's just, as a budding scientist, this greatly like disturbed me. That science is not given any credence in these things, and I hope that somewhere down the line that it is given credence, but it definitely wasn't given credence at the public hearing, except for by the younger people in the audience. But anyway, that's all I have to say. Uh, I am posting this on my vlogging channel because I wanted to express my experience with it. I'll probably go in more detail on the science part of it once I conclude my my project, because I still have more to do in my project. Once I conclude my project, I'll give a more detailed scientific explanation on my science channel, but I wanted to get this out there on my vlogging channel because it was just I'm aghast by like what happened. But anyway, until next time, auf Wiedersehen.